Hi there, and welcome to Steps Together, the Steps for Development podcast, where we come together to learn and build our own skills so we can help the children in our lives to thrive and succeed. I'm your host, Deb Johnson, and I'm so glad you're here. No matter what your role is in a child's life, you've come to the right place to learn about child development and kids who are differently wired. Here, you'll learn about the whys behind challenging behaviors, practical strategies that really make a difference, and how to advocate for and support all children as you become empowered with skills and tools that bring lasting change. I have done a couple of episodes where I talk about meltdowns. And I have shared with you that the Steps for Development approach is very much focused on being proactive so that we can teach skills to eliminate meltdowns. Following the work of Dr. Ross Greene, who wrote The Explosive Child, I really believe that children do well if they can. And if they're not doing well, it's because they don't have the skills, and it's up to us to teach those skills. The problem is that if I tell you, well, we just need to do better and teach them so that the meltdowns go away, you are still left with the burning question, what do I do during a meltdown? So today I want to talk about that. I gave a brief overview. There's an episode about being proactive, why reacting to meltdowns doesn't work, and what you should do instead. I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode if you haven't already. Today, what I want to focus on, though, is what to actually do during the meltdown. It's the most common question I get, which is, what do I do when they have that outburst? What do I do when my child is throwing things and breaking things or hitting me or hitting others, whatever they do when they're in those out of body experiences, when they've reached that point of no return? And to be honest, the answer is it depends. And, I know that's probably a frustrating answer, but certainly in this podcast episode, I can't give each and every one of you individualized responses. And the reality is, what you do in the moment for your child is completely dependent upon you and your child. So it's hard for me to tell you whether you should touch them, hold them, talk to them. I don't know what your child specifically needs. However, what I can give you are some general guidelines, some things that I've learned as an occupational therapist and as a parent that are far more effective than trying to dole out discipline or process and talk to the child and all kinds of things that we tend to do, which are not very productive at all. So I want to focus today then on giving you those guidelines and helping you to do a couple of different things, like teasing out, is this a tantrum or a meltdown? What's going on in my child's nervous system in the moment? And I'll give you some general guidelines with information so that you'll have those tools and really know what to do. Hopefully feeling much more confident with responding during a meltdown. So first, let's talk about what is a meltdown and is it the same as a tantrum? The answer is no. A tantrum and a meltdown are two completely different things. And keep in mind, meltdown is not some sort of a medical term. It's just a popular term that we use. You could call it an outburst, an emotional outburst. Meltdown is just kind of the common term that we use when we're talking about dysregulation. Tantrums, on the other hand, are not dysregulation. Tantrums are, in fact, developmentally appropriate, especially between the ages of 2 and 4. So you can see children as young as 18 months, sometimes younger, depending on the child, having tantrums. And you can certainly see children over the age of 4 still having tantrums. The ages of 2 to 4 are just averages. They are not hard and fast rules. So I don't want you to think that if your child is younger or older and still displaying tantrums, that there's something wrong with them. Tantrums are typically triggered by things like the child having their wants being blocked. They want a toy. They want something specific to eat for dinner. They want a specific color of cup. They want to sit on your lap. They maybe don't want to go to bed. Sometimes it's things they don't want. And that can trigger a tantrum. It's very typical to see tantrums as children test boundaries. Testing boundaries is a developmental task. Children have to test boundaries in order to figure out what is their scope of control. What do they control? Who do they control? How do they navigate this world around them? And who has the final say so? They very often will have a tantrum, maybe because of limits or structure that is put on them, and they don't like that structure. They don't like those limits. And again, tantrums are perfectly normal. Now, during a tantrum, things that you'll notice that are not present in a meltdown are that, number one, the child generally remains very aware of their environment. You'll sometimes see a child having a tantrum, sort of looking out of the corner of their eye, or maybe they'll look down at the ground, or they're laying on the ground with their face down, and then suddenly they look up and they're checking to see where the adult is. They're very aware of what's going on because the whole point of the tantrum is to see if they can shift things, to see if they can get the control, to see if they can get what it is that they really want. The behaviors that you see during a tantrum are very goal directed, and they're goal directed towards pushing the boundaries or testing the limits. They're very goal directed towards seeing what do I control and what don't I control? How much can I do here? Again, it's all part of the learning curve for a toddler that is developmentally appropriate. Generally speaking, if a child is having a tantrum and you meet their want or their need, right? That to them, they're very egocentric. So they need that ice cream. They need the toy that their friend has. They need to stay up and watch more television. So if you meet that need that they are expressing this tantrum about, usually then the tantrum stops. Maybe there's a little bit of a delay. Maybe they continue to do some screaming or crying, but they pretty quickly redirect, and now they're happy because they got what they wanted. And that makes them happy. It's important to know that a tantrum can absolutely escalate into a meltdown. So neurodiverse children are still going to developmentally display tantrums. They should. Sometimes they display them later than expected. I have worked with children who have been very, very complacent and cooperative and not really, they just haven't developed the sense of autonomy. So they're not really asserting themselves independently yet. And they might be 6, 7, 8 years old, but they have those developmental delays. And then as they develop a sense of autonomy, they start to assert themselves. And this can be very shocking to parents that are thrilled that their child escaped the terrible twos. Well, the problem is the terrible twos are an important developmental step. They're very important for our children to push those boundaries and to test those limits and to figure out where they fit in the grand scheme of things and what do they control and what don't they control. So we want children to eventually be able to assert themselves. We want them to develop that sense of autonomy and that sense of control over themselves. And that does mean testing boundaries and testing limits. The challenge is that when you have an older child having a tantrum, we sometimes get, sideways glances when we're at the store, or our family members give that unsolicited advice, and they don't quite understand the challenges that come from a child with developmental delays who's having that tantrum. They also don't get it that the tantrum can very quickly escalate into a complete meltdown because the child doesn't have the self-regulation skills to be able to navigate the demands, being able to navigate the persistent structure of no, you can't have that, or yes, this is what we're going to do. And so then you can just quickly get a dysregulated child. So it's very important to keep that in mind and to know that with our neurodiverse children, the way we respond to tantrums can add to their stress. So you need to have some good strategies and tools, being able to recognize, oh, this is a tantrum. They're testing the limits, and I'm going to maintain the structure, but I am also going to scaffold this situation for my child. I'm going to stay very regulated. I am going to stay very consistent. I am going to, offer alternatives. I'm going to guide them into a different task or into the choices that matter. I'm going to recognize their strengths and their needs and all those complex things that we have to recognize when we are doing our problem solving using the steps for development approach. So what then is a meltdown? Well, a meltdown is, at its core, nothing more than nervous system overload. It's not a behavioral choice. And kids are not the only ones who have meltdowns. You, as an adult, have had your meltdowns. I've had my meltdowns. I have told my two youngest kids, I called it a mommy meltdown, and I have apologized to them many times for the mommy meltdowns that I had when I just lost it. I had nervous system overload myself, and I started yelling and screaming and doing all the things that we see our kids do. If you've ever experienced any kind of catastrophic loss or some sort of really, really bad news that was just overwhelming for you, you have likely experienced a meltdown. Again, these are not intentional, they are not manipulative, and they're not under our control. When we go into this highly dysregulated state, we are in nervous system overwhelm. There's just too much information. There's too much stuff going on. Maybe it's sensory information that has completely overloaded our system. Maybe it's the cognitive demands that are just beyond our capacity, right? In the example of, an adult getting really bad news, maybe it's just more than you can wrap your head around. It's devastating news. And you go into this complete nervous system shutdown or overreaction. I've experienced that around family members when somebody was very ill, and at times of great loss where you just can't deal with it. It's that cognitive sensory overwhelm. Maybe there's a tremendous amount of anxiety with fear of uncertainty or novelty or any of those kinds of things. Maybe it's trauma responses. Maybe there's a situation that has triggered a trauma response. And please keep in mind that trauma is not an event. There are traumatic events, but the trauma is the response to the event. And it's the behavioral responses and the physical responses, the cognitive responses that we experience when the trauma is triggered. So your child might have trauma responses for reasons you don't even understand. They've had some event that has produced those trauma responses, and then there's a trigger, and that just brings all those responses back up again, and now their nervous system is completely dysregulated. We experience meltdowns because we lack the skills to control our responses. Maybe we're facing task demands that we don't have coping skills for, we don't have the capacity for. Repeated failures because we don't have the skills, and we keep getting put into this situation where we have to meet the task demands. That can trigger a meltdown. We can also experience meltdowns that are related to learned behavior patterns, where there's just this dynamic. It's a very maladaptive dynamic where the adult responses are triggering the meltdown. And it's important for us as adults to own that and to learn how our responses to our children are actually triggering those meltdowns. Maybe it's our language, maybe it's our lack of connection, maybe it's our own dysregulated state that is worsening things for the child. So any one or all of these things can combine to create a meltdown. Meltdowns, observationally, can manifest in two different ways. They can be extremely loud and physical. It can be crying, hitting, screaming, throwing, all those things that are very clear to see that this child is in a meltdown, right? It's this extreme physical, loud reaction, an outburst. However, meltdowns can also manifest as shutdowns. Your child might experience a complete shutdown. You, as an adult, might experience nervous system dysregulation this way, where instead of being loud and demonstrative, you are actually completely withdrawn, silent, you go into hiding, you have this freeze response, and maybe even a fawning response where you're people pleasing. So you might have the flight or fright, which is loud, or you might have the freeze or fawn, which is more quiet and hard to even pick up on. We might not even notice that our child is having a meltdown when it manifests in this quiet, withdrawn state. So do keep in mind that a meltdown can occur without a tantrum. Now, earlier I just said that a tantrum can escalate into a meltdown. However, a meltdown can just come out of nowhere. And maybe your child isn't even yet displaying tantrums developmentally, but they absolutely have these meltdowns. I have seen that over and over again. And so, again, a tantrum can shift to a meltdown. A meltdown doesn't necessarily have to come from a tantrum. And a meltdown is never, ever going to shift into a tantrum. Once the child hits a meltdown stage, they're gone. The horse is out of the barn, and they're not going back down, so to speak, to a tantrum. That's just not going to happen. So if your neurodiverse child has a tantrum, that's the time to catch it, not wait until they're up at the top of the mountain. If you listened to one of my previous episodes, I have an episode that's called Self-Regulation is a Journey, Not a Destination. Look for that episode. I talk about how self-regulation during the course of the day is like traveling on a road. And we come across speed bumps, maybe little hills, all through the day. And most of us can navigate those. We go up and over and we're just fine. We don't escalate too high. We don't keep climbing to a high elevation, so to speak. Um, what we want to do with our children is to be cognizant of their journey. We want to watch them and see how many speed bumps have they hit during the day? How many little hills have they had to climb? For neurodiverse people, you may experience this constant accumulation of the stress so that you had 6 or 8 speed bumps today. And by the time you hit the ninth one, your nervous system is shot. And that is now no longer a little hill, it becomes a mountain. And you end up climbing that mountain and you're all the way up at the peak. And once you get to the peak, your limbic system has hijacked your thinking brain. When you're halfway up the mountain, we might be able to navigate that. We might be able to implement some strategies and come on back down and keep that hill from becoming a mountain. But once we get up over that halfway point, we get up to, if we think about the bottom of the mountain is a 0 and the top is a 5, once we hit 3 or so, forget it. You're probably going to just keep going unless there's some sort of intervention. That's where the proactive piece comes into play. You want to know what your child looks like when they're at a 3 so that you can be bringing them down. And you want to be able to notice that. If your child has escalated and they are up at that high elevation on the top of a mountain, the limbic system has hijacked their thinking brain. You could think about it that they're at the peak of a mountain and the air is super thin and they're having a hard time breathing. Or they're way up at the top and they're looking over a cliff and they're scared of heights. Or they've gotten up to the top of this thing and they don't have a clue how they're going to get down and they've just lost it because they're scared, they're frightened, they just don't know what to do anymore. It's that fight or flight response up at the top of the mountain. When kids are at that point, they have lost access to their logic, their language, their problem solving, their impulse control, their organization, their planning, their self-regulation. It's all gone. So you cannot approach them at the top of the mountain and try to solve the problem with them. It just isn't going to work. They're not receptive to problem solving. I gave you the analogy earlier of adults who receive devastating news. So think about an adult in the emergency room after a horrific accident being told that a loved one has passed away. They're going to go into this nervous system dysregulation. They've just received this devastating news. It is more than their mind can wrap their head around. It's more than they can wrap their head around. It's more than their emotional system can handle. So they lose it. And no matter how much somebody pats them on the back and says it's going to be all right, that adult is not going to listen. You can say stop crying as much as you want. They're not going to be able to stop crying. The same thing is true for our children. When they are experiencing that level of overwhelm and they're up at the peak of that mountain, they're feeling alone, they're scared, they're not thinking, they're not able to tap into logic and reasoning. So if you start to try to negotiate with them, if you try to give them what it is that they wanted at the beginning of this process, like maybe they had this meltdown because they didn't get the green cup or whatever it is, you try to give them the green cup, you know for sure it's a meltdown, because if you try to do that when they're at the peak of this outburst or even their shutdown, they might completely ignore you. They just don't even respond. Or they become more angry that when you try to talk to them, they get more upset. They push you away and they might throw what you're giving them. Right? Maybe you give them the green cup. You're like, here it is. Take the green cup. And instead of accepting it and saying, great, I got what I was looking for, like you would see with a tantrum, instead they throw the cup at you. The reason is because they're at the peak of the mountain. and they need some time and support to get back down. So this is where the behaviors don't make sense. And this is where parents are asking me for, what do I do? Right? This is where they're asking for the guidelines. So what do we do in the middle of that meltdown? What do we do when they're at the peak? Their air is thin. They're in fight or flight. They've shut down. They're stuck. They don't know how to get down. All right. First things first, put on your own oxygen mask. You have got to stay regulated yourself. You need to calm your own nervous system. It is a priority, a number one priority, because that is the anchor for co-regulation. You can engage in whatever things work for you. Hopefully, you have learned some strategies. One of mine at this point is to pause and wait. I try not to interrupt when my kids are throwing out statements or, complaining, venting, moaning. I can tell they're dysregulated by their pressured speech. They're speaking fast. They're getting loud. And I try to just stay quiet now. I try not to step in and fix it or to say it's going to be okay. It's all right. It's not a big deal, right? So I try to breathe a little bit. Maybe I count to 10 or at least 5 before I even try to respond. Maybe you need to ground yourself, right? Think about the things you can see, the things you can touch, the things you can feel, to ground yourself in your own body so that you are able to practice cognitive empathy with your child, not affective empathy where you feel the feeling, where you escalate with them, or where you go down into the hole and you feel their sadness, their shutdown. You need to practice cognitive empathy, which means being able to understand where your child is coming from, what your child is experiencing without feeling it yourself. Because you have to be the thinker. You have to be the one that's holding on to reasoning and logic and co-regulating with your child. Your tone, the pace of your language, your presence, just being there matters much more than the words you say. And in fact, step 2 is that you limit the input, including your language. So pay attention to your body language, your tone, how you're being present for your child. Stay grounded, stay regulated. Step 1. Step 2, reduce the input. Your child does not need more input. They don't need fidgets in this moment. They don't need deep pressure in the moment. They don't need a whole lot from you except presence, removing expectations. Stop talking, lecturing. Don't try to correct them. Simplify everything you can and just stay present. No questions, no choices. Don't ask them why this is happening. Don't ask if they want this or this. They're on overload. Think about yourself. When you're on overload, you don't want to make a decision. You don't want choices thrown at you. You're not thinking in terms of being able to make a decision like that. So don't ask your child to make a choice. Do you want this fidget or do you want to go ride the swing? They don't know what they want and they don't know what they need in the moment. So again, we're talking about when they're at a 5, they're at the peak of the mountain. You need to reduce sensory input, reduce language, remove demands, focus on supporting this child so they can get down on the other side of the mountain and start to be open to the strategies and the tools that are going to better help them regulate. So step 3 is that you are going to co-regulate and not control, but you're going to be patient and wait for them to start to come down on the other side. When kids start to come down on the other side, you're going to start to see some changes. You're going to see changes in their posture. You're going to see maybe changes in their breathing. They take a deep breath. They let out a big sigh. Their crying stops. They stop throwing things. Maybe if they've been in more of a shutdown mode, maybe they start talking or they move closer to you. So you'll start to notice those kinds of things. That means they're coming back down off the mountain. Again, remember, in the peak of the meltdown, at the top of the mountain, you are not trying to control their behavior. You're going to control the environment. You're going to control your own responses. You're going to simplify what's going on in the moment. You're going to stay present, keep them safe. Maybe you need to move them, remove things if they're throwing them, those kinds of things. Maybe you need to bring another person in if your child is particularly aggressive. Again, I'm trying to give you general guidelines because a meltdown for one child is going to be very different than how another child presents. So generally speaking is what we're talking about here. All right, so you're offering the co-regulation up at the peak of the mountain. Step 4 is as they start to come down, you're going to work on the regulation, not the behavior. Don't focus on controlling the behavior. You're still working on supporting the nervous system. So once you start to see some of those signs, the change in posture, the sigh, the shift in they shift over and come closer to you. Maybe they were sprawled on the floor and now they want to crawl into your lap. Maybe they've been sitting on your lap and now they move away. So you want to respond to that shift by helping their nervous system. So now's the time to offer some of those strategies. I would say still do not give choices, but just present something like, can I give you a hug? Would you like a hug right now? That's a way to provide the deep pressure. Maybe to hold out a fidget, right? Do you want to play with this for a minute? No choices, but some options that tap into the sensory experiences. Maybe at that point, your child needs a little bit of space to just be alone. Maybe they don't want you near. Maybe they need movement. Maybe they'll follow you to go out and take a walk or to jump on the trampoline or whatever it is that's a little bit more regulating for them. In this moment, when they have started to come down off the mountain, do not try to fix things. Don't try to negotiate. Don't discipline. Do not try to process what's going on for the child. They are still dysregulated and they are still working their way back down. They were all the way up at the peak at a 5. Now they're maybe at a 4, coming down on the other side of the mountain or climbing back down the mountain. And you can only do reconnection and repair when they get to a 3. They've got to get halfway back down that mountain where their thinking brain can engage again. And you need to follow your child's lead for that. See what it is that they're ready for and when they're ready to talk about it. Processing the whole situation might come way later down the road. You need to get them off that mountain back into a regulated state. You can talk about this later, maybe even the next day. And processing needs to happen at a time when the child is calm and in a ready state for learning. You want them calm and relaxed and ready to learn, ready to hear new information. And then, of course, how you process it is, again, completely dependent on your child's developmental level, their cognitive capacities, and so on. At the end of the meltdown, you want to keep that repair short, simple, and supportive. So you want to maybe accept an apology. As your child comes down, they might apologize to you. They might be feeling guilty, maybe even a little ashamed of the way they reacted. Do give them your love and attention and connection and let them know that they made a mistake and it's okay. You make mistakes too. And we all make mistakes and then we learn from them. And they need to know that it's okay. Forgive yourself at the same time, because if you maybe started to get dysregulated, or if something you did inadvertently triggered the meltdown, give yourself that grace. Be compassionate for yourself and for your child. And trust me, this too shall pass. And now that you've gotten through that meltdown, you can later go back and do reflect and repair. There's a whole episode I've got on that process as well. It's a steps for development process, R&R, reflect and repair. It's how we go back and look at these really tough moments and examine them objectively and analyze them so that we can problem solve and do better the next time. Maybe recognize the child's signs that they were escalating, maybe change something in our routines, maybe change something in our own language and how we react to the child, how we respond. So, key takeaways from today. Tantrums and meltdowns are two completely different things. Tantrums are very much a developmentally appropriate behavior. They're goal-oriented and they serve a purpose developmentally for the child to learn and learn new skills. They require your structure and your support to teach the skills. Meltdowns are overload, not a behavioral choice. Complete overload, overwhelm, again, outburst or shutdown could be either one of the two extremes. It is a state of dysregulation where the brain can't process information. So you should not be attempting to talk, negotiate, reason with, offer choices. None of that should happen when your child is in the peak of a meltdown. What they need at the top of the mountain is you. They need your calm, they need your regulation, they need your presence in whatever way works for your child. Please approach meltdowns with compassion and understanding. Cognitive empathy for the fact that your child is not out to give you a hard time. Your child in this meltdown is having a hard time. And I want you to be curious about the meltdown and recognize that your child is stuck on the peak of the mountain and really needs your help to come back down. Prevention absolutely matters. And I want you to go back and learn to be proactive. Bringing your child down from the peak of the mountain doesn't really teach them how to stay regulated. And that's what we want. So we want to catch their dysregulation when they're halfway up that mountain. That's how they learn. I just know that those outbursts are going to happen. It's not a perfect world. And until your child matures and grows and builds those skills, until you build those skills to help guide your child, these outbursts and meltdowns are going to happen. So let's just be prepared for them and know how we can hold our own ground stay regulated ourselves, and provide our children the support and guidance they need to come on back down off that mountain. And I know how hard this is. I've been there. I've had my own children experiencing meltdowns. I have made mistakes in therapy sessions. So kids have ended up just having huge meltdowns. And, our focus is always to keep children regulated. The reality is we don't have control over children. Their little nervous systems, their bodies, their brains, they're going to do things that we're not prepared for. They're going to do things that are triggered by stuff inside them. So give yourself some slack. You can't control their behaviors. You can only control your response. So I hope that this episode has given you some solid tools to use. And if you're interested, you can download the guide that goes with this episode. I'll put all these steps in there so you'll have a reference. So you don't need to remember everything that I've said in this episode. Remember, every time you go through one of these meltdown processes, you're building your skills, you're building your understanding, and you're building your confidence so that you can support your child towards more success and learning the skills of regulation. Next time your child starts to escalate, please try to catch it and use those strategies to bring them back down. If they escalate, take a moment, pause, and ask yourself, is this a tantrum or is this a meltdown? And then take it from there, because if it's a tantrum, you're going to need to provide structure and be consistent and authoritative parenting. Sorry, stuttered on my words there. Authoritative parenting, right? Acknowledging their need, but still being firm and structured, which is what they need to learn, being consistent. Or are they having a meltdown and you need to stay regulated and you need to shift your focus to helping them get back down off that mountain? When it's all over, don't forget to reflect and repair. Go back and listen to that episode if you haven't already. And do let me know if you would like some one-on-one support or if there's anything I can do to help you navigate through this process of managing meltdowns. If you like what you hear on these podcasts, please share. I would love to have more people join us as we learn how to build our own skills to help the kids in our lives to thrive and succeed. Until next time, take care and count your successes. Find those successes in the small wins, small steps, big successes. Take care and bye for now.